Riley Car Company started as a small family business in May 1896 and quickly became known for producing cars of innovative quality and design. Slogans such as old as the industry, as modern as the hour, and the late magnificent motoring were all truly earned. Over the last few months, people from literally all over the world have been fettling their Rileys and preparing to converge on the historic setting of Combe Abbey near Coventry, England, for a very special event. But what is that event?
For the Riley Centenary Rally, what else?
The Riley Centenary Rally is a once-in-a-lifetime event. After all, none of us can expect to be around for the bicentenary. This landmark event in Riley history is made all the more special because there are still a few people around who knew the old Riley company well and the people who worked there personally. There are even some descendants of the founder of the Riley mark who can remember the family life of the first generation of Rileys. But where did it all begin? The answer lies just a few miles away from the Raleigh site in St Nicholas Street, Coventry, where the Riley company were master weavers and trimming manufacturers. St Nicholas Street, Coventry. This is where it all started 100 years ago, but sadly, there's not a lot left to see. To find out more about those early days, there's no one better to talk to than Dr. David Stiles. David, tell me something about the very, very early history of the Riley family, in fact, pre-motor car.
Well, the Riley family originally came to England. William and Sarah Riley left Ireland in 1773, and the logical place to come was England because William Riley had a skill. The alternative was to go to America. So he came to England, aimed for Coventry, which was of course the centre of England's ribbon weaving industry, and settled to set up his own weaving business as a master weaver. Now, from there, his son, I suppose the first of the present Riley dynasty, if that's the right way to put it, was born in 1775 in Coventry. He was apprenticed to his father in 1789 as a weaver. 1796, just 200 years ago, he was given the freedom of the city of Coventry, having completed his indentures as an apprentice weaver. By 1884, of course, John Starley introduced the Rover safety bicycle, which is basically the pattern of bicycles that we all ride today. And William Riley had his warehouse and works literally round the corner from where one of the very famous personalities of early cycling used to live, Henry Sturmey. And William Riley and Henry Sturmey became good friends. Riley began to take more interest in bicycles. He bought one, and then he decided that there had to be an easier way of getting a bicycle up hills. And so he began to work out ideas as to how he might put a spring in the chain wheel hub of his bicycle so that he could wind the spring up going downhill, and then it would help propel him up the hill on the other side. Of course, William's sons grew up into bicycling. And in 1896, the name of Bonnick & Company was changed to the Riley Cycle Company.
So that's how it all started.
That's how we got to bicycles.
Tell me, what was the contribution that Percy Riley made, and where does he fit into the equation?
Percy was William's third son. And at the time that the cycle business was developing, in fact, at the time that the Riley Cycle Company was formed, Percy Riley was 13 years old. And he thought, well, these things on wheels ought really to have four, because he looked around him and there had been one or two motor cars built in Coventry and being sold in Coventry. And he liked the idea of the four-wheeled car. So in 1896, he actually set about building a car. He was still at King Henry VIII Grammar School. And so in 1898, his first car was built and completed. Percy was then just short of his 16th birthday. And Victor took on a challenge that this machine should be able to travel, if it was going to sell, faster than the bicycle. And the challenge was to get from Coventry to Stratford-on-Avon, which is a distance of 18 miles, quicker than you would be able to do that distance on a bike. Well, they did it. One trip, 36 miles without a single hitch, in a car which was built by a young man between his 13th and 16th birthdays, and it featured the first mechanically operated inlet valve in any internal combustion engine in the world, predating Carl Benz's application for a world patent on the mechanically operated inlet valve by a year.
So they were innovators.
Oh yes, very definitely. Percy was a genius.
An amazing company and amazing people.
Indeed it was.
David, I believe you'd like to introduce someone very special to us now.
Yes. Today we have amongst our midst the man who is the son of the former chairman and managing director of Riley Coventry Limited, Victor Riley.
I'm here with Victor Riley, grandson of the founder of the Riley Mark and the current president of the Association of Riley Clubs. Welcome.
Thank you.
Victor, tell me something about your early family memories.
Well, my early family memories would be perhaps sitting on my father's lap and driving a Kestrel 5 miles through the Cotswold Lanes and steering it. Unfortunately, we didn't meet anyone. That is my earliest memory of all.
What was it like growing up in the Riley family in those days?
For a child, it was a little bit...
It's been special.
Yes, but also slightly almost intimidating because there are so many official functions. Because in 1946 we had the 50th anniversary of the motor industry, and there seemed to be some function somewhere in Europe almost every week, and often in school holidays we travelled with mother and father. It seemed just to be an endless round of official functions, and one couldn't really be a child for that particular year. But if I go back to early family history, that's what makes me intensely curious, is how Percy Riley, while still at school, 13 years old, heard about these two gentlemen who came to Coventry to build the first power station, somehow found their way to the house of William Riley and ordered a car, which William Riley wanted nothing to do with, and he said pony and trap and bicycle were quite sufficient. We believe there was prejudice because he had the smartest pony and trap in Coventry. He probably didn't want anything to interfere with that. So Percy decided to build a car himself by hand. So every weekend, away from school, he'd creep into the Riley cycle tool room, and 2 years later he produced the first car.
What sort of influence did your father have over you in the early days? Did you know him very well then?
I got to know him very well, but the time when I got to know him very well was when I started my apprenticeship. And once he'd accepted that I hadn't gone into the motor industry directly, but through a backdoor through components, then he took an enormous interest, and a lot of experiences were shared between my apprenticeship and his, although his had been a long, long time ago.
You'd served your time and earned your stripes, literally.
Yes, and so then we came very, very close indeed, and went motor racing together, and of course came my great desire to do rally driving and racing. And then we fell out a bit because he said no, on no account, till your apprenticeship's finished. And then of course by then, I think by 21 you're too late for motor racing if you're not on the ladder by then. So I turned to rally driving, and that was great fun.
Your mother, of course, was a very famous lady and associated with the Riley advertising, wasn't she?
Yes, yes.
What was it like having a famous mother?
That was possibly more difficult, especially as I began to learn to drive. The clashes I had with her on driving technique were tremendous, because whereas my father on a journey would drive fast but with total safety and great anticipation, my mother still believed she was in a rally or at Le Mans, because of course for 50 years she was the highest placed woman driver at Le Mans, finishing 13th in 1934, and I think it was the 60s before 70s.
So she was a very confident driver in her own right.
Yes, but very fast and very competitive, and let the road be an extension of what she'd done before she'd married. She never really gave up wanting to race, and I think it must have been an awful struggle for her whether to have children or carry on racing. And when she was expecting me, Raymond Mays wrote out a new model, would you like to come over and test it? So she set off for Stowe on the Wold to Bourne, and my father got home from Coventry. He got home about 7 in the evening. House was empty, and of course hours later he discovered she was over at Raymond Mays' testing track and he nearly had a fit because I was only about 3 months away. But that caused a big bust up between them, and so he said no more.
So she was a very great character, your mother?
Quite a character, yes, very, very competitive. When I got old enough to argue with her, I used to say, you're the quickest person to get someone into a scrape on the road, but you're also the best person to get out of that scrape.
Victor
yes,
Riley,
yes,
thank you very much indeed, and it's lovely to have you with us.
Thank you very much, thank you.
Having learned a little about the early history of the Riley family and company, let's go back to the rally. In 1906, the 9-horsepower V-twin was announced, followed shortly by the 10 and the 12-18 horsepower models. These cars formed the basis of Riley production until the outbreak of World War I. Alan Teeder is the owner of this 1911 12-horsepower model. Alan, you're the president of the Riley Register. Can you tell me something about this, please?
Okay, there are 3 Riley clubs in England, and the Riley Register is the one which looks after pre-war cars.
I believe you organise rallies.
Well, from time to time, but for this one we organised a special one. A group of us decided that one weekend wasn't really enough for a centenary, so we organised a set of rallies starting from all over the countryside. One group started in Stirling, one group started in Land's End, another group started at Harwich, and I started with a group let's say again, I started at Canterbury.
So you come as far as that? Have you been round to all these rallies personally?
No, it's a little bit difficult in a car like this. It can't quite make it, I'm afraid.
Have you rebuilt this car from scratch at all?
The restoration slowed down. Have to wait for a few more funds, I suppose, but we're keeping it running and slowly improving it.
What do you plan to do with it next?
I think put some leather seats and nice things like that in it.
Did you actually have to rebuild the car at all?
Quite a lot, yes. Fortunately, the car was complete, even though it was very, very badly rusted and rotted in places. So I kept as much as I could and cut and welded new pieces in.
What sort of mileage do you get out of interest on the road in this?
I only do possibly 1,000 miles a year, certainly many hundreds. I use it a lot.
So you do use it a lot?
Yes.
It's nice to see a well-used car. Alan, thanks for your time and thanks for the interview.
Okay.
During the Great War, the whole of the Riley production capacity was devoted to war work for the Ministry of Munitions. The company made no profit for its work and produced all the vehicles at cost as part of the war effort. November 1918 brought the Great War to an end, and by the time of the Olympia Motor Show in 1919, Riley had introduced a completely new car design. Now known as the 10/8 side valves, they were developed to make production easier and less costly than before. It also gave the customer the advantage of low maintenance costs and greater ease of operation. The Automobile Engineer magazine was glowing in its praise of the new design. These cars were the first to introduce the now famous V radiator as we know it today, and they were mounted with the equally famous Riley badge with the blue diamond surround. The 1920 Olympia show was where the advertising slogan
"As old as the industry"
was first used, with the other half of the slogan
"As modern as the hour"
coming into use in the 1925 Motor Show. The slogans stayed in use until 1938, and they were always appropriate. As the 1920s progressed, more models were produced and prices were steadily reduced, so the market was continually widened. There were also some notable successes in competition during this period, which continued until the side valve models ceased in production in 1928. For almost a decade, the side valve cars had established Riley's post-war reputation in the medium-price car market. A car of great character, to some a work of art, had slipped into history, leaving behind a tremendous record of sporting achievements and reliability as its heritage. We talked to David and Dick Cresswell from Essex about what it's like to own side valve Riley cars. I'm here with Dick and David Cresswell from Essex. Tell me, how long have you owned Riley cars?
Well, we've owned Riley cars for a very long time. In fact, it's been 40 years since we had our first Riley.
40 years.
40 years,
Did you
yes.
both become interested in Rileys at the same time?
Yes, we did. One of our friends had a Riley 9, and we thought that they were, jolly good motors. So we looked out for a Riley 9 ourselves. That's right. I'm pleased with it.
How does she handle on the road?
Oh, it's a superb car to drive. It's very comfortable. It rides beautifully. And it's not fast, but it gets along about the 45, 50, that's right. We get here. We left home in Essex at 10 past 8, and after 120 miles we were here at 5 to 12. 5 to 12, so that isn't bad.
Tell me, when were the first SV Rileys produced?
The side valve Riley was produced after the First World War. The first one came out in 1919. It was designed by Harry Rush, who was the first non-Riley family member to design Rileys. Both Percy and Stanley Riley were committed to other work. And it's very conventional. It's side valve engine, 1.5 litre when it came out in 1919. Separate cardan shaft, cone clutch, 4-speed crash box, open pop shaft to the back axle.
How long were they actually in production?
They're in production from 1919 to 1928, and of course the Riley 9 came out in 1926 and really in production 1927, and really they just phased the old side valve out then. It was getting a little bit old-fashioned in design and concept by then.
Tell me, what's it like getting hold of spares for the side valve models?
Well, we're in a fortunate position that we haven't really had to need many spares to date, but I'm sure that it shouldn't be a problem, because reading some of the early Riley records, Mr. Victor Riley, when the side valve was discontinued, said the company would continue to produce spares as long as Riley side valves were on the road. And looking around the field today, I can see there are several Riley side valves, so I'm sure that BMW or the Rover Group will take that on hand.
Tell me, between the two cars, which do you prefer to drive?
Well, I think really the side valve, is so comfortable and rides well. But on the other hand, when you're in the 9, that's got a little bit more life and go. And really, I've got to say, it's the one you're driving at the time. Yes.
Live for the moment, eh?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Anyway, Dick and David, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
1926 saw the introduction of the momentous Riley 9 prototype. It was this model which literally revolutionised the small car market overnight and became the standard against which all other cars were measured. The engine, with its overhead valves, hemispherical head and high-mounted twin cams, had far better power output than was typical of the period. When this combination was allied to a chassis with excellent handling characteristics and in due course suitable brakes, it made up a package that became an instant sales hit. The essential design characteristics of the 9 engine were carried through all subsequent Riley engine designs, right up until the 1954 Pathfinder engine, though thankfully the 9 engine was the only one to feature a 2-bearing crank. Who better to talk us through this jewel in the Riley crown than Chris Pack? He's a lifelong Riley enthusiast and the pre-war consultant of this film. Chris, tell me, how did you first become interested in Riley cars?
Well, it started in 1957. I went to university and I passed my driving test on my father's brand new Hillman Lynx. And then I found that my fellow undergraduates all tended to have Riley 9s, and they let me drive their cars, and I was amazed to find that these cars, conceived some 30 years before father's Hillman, were nicer. They steered more nicely, they drove more nicely, and they had infinitely more character. So I bought one.
Well, what have you got today?
Well, this car is a 1930 Riley 9 Biarritz. Now, I had many Rileys in the early years, perhaps as many as a dozen. In those days, one could buy Rileys for £5 or £10, and indeed I did. And I had a Brooklands Riley for several years. And in those days, if something wore out, it was cheaper to buy another motor car and rob it of bits than go and have something made. And this one was advertised for £200, which even then was cheap. but when I got to see it, it was quite terrible. It had stood out in the open air for perhaps 20 years and rotted away. So it was a long job bringing it back to running condition. But now, as you see, it's here today, and indeed I've been driving it now for about 10 years, and it's very much a working car rather than a polishing car.
Yeah, you enjoy the car then?
Oh yes, I've always thought that the Riley is a car to drive. The Riley 9 made its fame because it was so much better to drive than the opposition in 1926-27.
Tell me, what do they like to drive?
Well, I think the best way to demonstrate that is to take you for a drive in it.
Okay,
I think they're lovely cars. They will keep up with modern traffic, and I'd just like to demonstrate that to you.
Let's see what she's like on the road.
Okay, let's take her for a run. They're very nice motor cars to drive, and one covers the ground. I find that in normal traffic conditions you can put 40 miles in the hour without really trying. And if there is a need to get a move on, this car will cruise at 60 and occasionally 70 will come up. Goodness knows what revolutions the two-bearing crankshaft is doing. And here we are cruising along at 40. Beautiful steering, absolutely precise, doesn't wander at all, light as a feather. Lovely car to drive on a country lane like this. Little bit of bucking and broncoing because the suspension is 60-something years old. And now the brakes. Not too bad, pulls a little bit to the right. And we'll change down to this corner. Double declutching up and down as always. This is the sort of road this car was built for. Nice open country road. You can put 40 miles in the hour easily. When you think this car was announced very nearly 70 years ago, it's quite remarkable performance for a car of this age. It's no disgrace in modern traffic until you come to a hill when its power to weight ratio rather tells against it. And also accelerating in traffic. Get there eventually. It does take some time. We're doing 50 miles an hour, up a gentle hill, quite happy, cruising, and do this all day.
The name Brooklands is synonymous with racing, and the Riley Brooklands car lives up to its reputation. We caught up with Jerry Dick in his beautiful Riley Brooklands. Jerry, give us some details on the year of this car.
This is a 1930 Brooklands Riley, a road-going model as distinct from a racing one, and it's used quite a lot on the road.
Who were the previous owners?
I bought it 10 years ago from Bill Holmes, who'd had it for 20 years and done certain things to it. The most notable previous owner was Gillian Sillars, who is one of Percy Riley's daughters, who designed the Riley 9.
I believe you rebuilt the car. Can you tell me something about it?
It was rebuilt 5 years ago over quite a long period, but I did get professional help to do quite a lot to it.
Have you used the car a great deal since the rebuild?
It's been used a good deal. We've been to Holland in it, and last year we went to Northern Ireland, and it gets used most weeks. It goes somewhere.
A question that springs to mind with a car of this configuration is, what do you do with your luggage when you're travelling?
It's a bit of a problem. We get friends to travel with our other car and use that as a luggage van, and we strap a toothpaste and toothbrush to the handbrake, and that's not much more.
Do you attend many rallies and events with this car?
We not show people really. We do take it to one or two shows, and we always bring it to this rally at Coventry. But we don't like to show it off. We prefer using it.
And finally, do you have any stories about famous people who started racing Riley Brooklands?
Well, the most notable, I think, would be Freddie Dixon, and there were other people like Whitney Straight and Billy Cotton and so on. As a lot of people started their racing careers on Brooklands Rileys.
Jerry, many thanks for the interview.
Thank you.
Once the Riley 9 was established in the market, the Riley company then turned its attention to meeting the demand for more refinement, and the 6-cylinder engine was introduced. Initially the 14.6 in 1928, then supplemented by the 12.6 and later by the handsome 1935 15.6. The 30s saw the introduction of some truly beautiful body designs of both the saloons and the open tourer. The kestrel shape went through many changes to remain as modern as the hour, culminating in the lovely 6-light kestrel of 1936. By 1934, the Riley 9 was no longer powerful enough to compete in the 4-cylinder car market. So, in 1935, the 12.4 engine was introduced, together with a new range of bodies to complement it. The proliferation of different body styles and engine variations carried a heavy penalty, and by 1937, the Riley company was making a loss. Things became so bad that in 1938 a receiver was appointed, and later that same year the company was bought by Lord Nuffield, who later sold the company to Morris Motors. The new models for 1939 were 2 saloons and a 2-door 4-seater drophead with a choice of 1.5 and 2.5 litre engines. These cars retain many of the classic Riley features, but cost-cutting and rationalisation by Morris showed with changes in gearboxes and steering. In 1940, production ceased, when the factory once again turned its attention to war work. However, immediately after the war, Riley was ready to launch a new range of cars as soon as it was allowed to.
Magnificent motoring
Was promised and delivered with the attractive new 1.5 litre saloon, long and low with a fabric-covered roof, reminiscent of the early 30s and the Rileys of a bygone age. John, you're very lucky in that you've got 2 wonderful examples of Riley engineering. Can you tell me a little bit about them?
Yes, well, this green car is a 1936 Lynx 12.4, which I've had for about 4 or 5 years. I was very lucky, in fact, to get it because it had been owned by a 78-year-old man who'd had the car since 1952.
How many miles have you done in it?
It's when I got it, the old gentleman presented me with 2 MOT certificates. The first year it had done 10 miles, and the second year it had done 100 miles, and it's now done nearly 10,000 miles.
Right, so you enjoy the car?
Oh, indeed, yes, yes.
What is your other car?
My other car is this 1954 RME, which I've had for about 2 years. The body had been done without cleaning up the chassis, and that was what I was concerned about, and also concerned to see that all the mechanical parts were operating properly.
Have you done a lot of miles, you know?
No, it's only done just over 500 miles since I've put it back together.
It's still pretty new then?
Yes, yes.
I believe you've got something to do with the RM Club.
Yes, I'm chairman of the RM Club.
Slightly something to do with the
Yes,
RM Club then?
I've been chairman or I've been associated with the club for about 21 years now. I started as social secretary, and then I became the general secretary and then chairman.
Well, what would you say the main differences are between the pre-war and the post-war cars?
I think the RM is much more like a modern car to drive because it's got independent front suspension with torsion bars and hydraulic brakes. The Lynx, or the pre-war cars, of course, have got beam front axles and cart springs, but they do handle very, very well. They've got, certainly the 12.4 engine has got plenty of power, and the cars have got good road manners. I think anybody getting into or being used to a modern car would probably find it easier to cope with an RM than a pre-war one, but I enjoy driving it, and certainly I've never had any problems on the roads with it. I think the only time you do have to be careful is because the tyres are of a fairly narrow section. If the roads are wet and greasy, if you take a roundabout too enthusiastically, you can end up in difficulties if you're not careful.
So they perform fairly similarly?
They do, indeed.
What are your plans for the future with the cars?
Well, basically keeping them in good order. The various clubs cater for the different Riley models, and one of the reasons why the RM Club was formed, in fact, was to produce spares for the RM series to keep them running. And we do have a very wide range of spares, so it is easy to keep vehicles on the road. Now, the register cater for the pre-war cars. The Riley Motor Club cater for all Rileys, so between the three clubs there are plenty of spares available. That's and it is fairly easy to keep the cars running.
It's the important thing, keep on the road.
Yes, indeed. I think you'll find that quite a lot of that Riley fever is catching, and that having got one, people then look for another one, and so there's quite a lot of people who have more than one.
The 1.5 litre was soon followed by a 2.5 litre version, and in February 1948 a 2.5 litre 3-seater roadster was introduced in an attempt to capture the American market. Later the same year a drop-head coupe was produced, also with a 2.5 litre engine, although the design had been seen previously on a 1.5 litre chassis in prototype form as early as July 1946. In 1949, the Riley Company moved from Coventry to Abingdon, joining MG. The idea was that the two specialists and sporting names of the Nuffield Empire should be under one roof. In 1953, the 2.5 litre model was replaced by the Pathfinder, still with the familiar 2.5 litre engine, but with a new body shape. This was in production until 1956. From 1956 onwards, all cars bearing the Riley badge were to share the same bodies and power units with other cars in the BMC range, though people still continue to buy Riley badge cars. The 2.6, a Wolseley with a Riley badge and a 6-cylinder engine. Then came the Riley 1.5, shared with the Wolseley 1500, as BMC's rationalisation process continued. In 1959, the British Motor Corporation introduced the 1.5 litre Farina-style models, which included the Riley 468. This was followed by the 472 with an enlarged engine. Together they were in production for 10 years. In 1961, the Riley Elf was born, a Mini with the Riley radiator at the front and a small boot at the rear. This one is a convertible model. In 1965 it was followed by the Riley Kestrel, which was based on the Austin 1100. This was aimed upmarket with twin carburetors and a Riley badge. By 1968 the name Kestrel was dropped and the Riley became a 1300. This was the last Riley, still upmarket, but appealing to a different upmarket customer. The world of motoring had changed. During this time, production had moved from Abingdon to Cowley and later to Longbridge in the Austin plant. In late 1969, the decision was made to discontinue production of cars under the Riley name. BLMC, as it was then known, could not justify the low volume production and sales of between 8,000 and 10,000 cars a year in their overall plan. And so, almost exactly the God-given lifespan of man after the birth of the Riley badge, it was laid to rest, and the flag lowered for the last time. Meanwhile, the centenary celebrations at Coombe Abbey continue. During the last 24 hours, the usual peace and tranquility of the Abbey grounds have been shattered. The 3 rally clubs have descended, loading their spare parts and accessories into vans, cars and trailers, and converged on the Abbey. It is now mid-afternoon on Saturday, June 29th, 1996. And already we've seen Riley cars dating from 1904 to 1968. There are Riley enthusiasts here from all parts of the United Kingdom. A great British gathering celebrating a great British car. As one walks around the rally site, other accents are still to be heard, for this is truly an international event, with Riley enthusiasts from Holland, France, Switzerland, Scandinavia, the USA, Australia and New Zealand. We talked to Chris and Wilbert, a Riley Pathfinder, all the way from Australia. Well, almost. I believe you've driven all the way from Australia, overland, to get here today, is that correct?
That's right, yes.
What was the journey like?
Well, the first part from Madras up to probably the end of Iran was pretty traumatic. Health-wise, we suffered a bit, dysentery. We had problems getting fuel. The roads were the worst you could imagine. Fortunately, the car was the only good thing about the trip. Gave us no grief. That stopped us anyway. We had trouble with officialdom in Madras, getting the car from customs, getting out of the countries, and with insurance. We don't really get insurance anywhere. We actually drove this car most of the way without any insurance. And when we actually got here, we had that same problem again in Dover. Couldn't get insurance.
That's amazing. So how many thousand miles have you actually covered?
Up to date, including England, about 14,000.
14,000. You're going to drive back as well?
No, it's going in a container, shipped back, and we'll fly back.
Do you share the driving when you travel?
We do normally, but not on this trip.
So you didn't drive at all?
I drove for about 5-10 miles in Pakistan when Chris collapsed.
You actually collapsed?
Yes. He collapsed on the border of India. We had to unload everything out of the car, including the back seat, so that they could check for drugs, and then Chris had to put the car over the pits. And we reloaded the car, and then Chris was ill and collapsed, so I had to drive between the Indian border and the Pakistan border, do all the paperwork at the Pakistan border, and then drive on the way to Lahore, which I drove about 5-10 miles at 5 miles an hour, and I hit somebody.
No.
He walked straight out in front of me, and luckily I was going slow with potholes, and I stopped, and Chris got in, did the rest of the driving, because he was too scared I'd really hit somebody.
How long have you owned the car?
About 8 years now.
Have you had to do a lot of work on it?
Yeah, it was a total wreck.
A total?
When we got it. It was actually a spare parts car for another car. And when that chap sold the good car, he was left with this, and he then sold this. And I was the mug that bought it, you could say.
Have you actually rebuilt it then from scratch?
Yes, yeah, completely, yeah.
What are you going to do next on it?
Nothing, I hope.
Nothing you hope?
There's nothing else to do. It's all done, I hope. We'll just drive it and enjoy it now.
That's great. Well, thanks for coming all this way, and have a safe journey home, however you get there.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Riley enthusiasts were kind enough to bring to the Centenary event their own amateur video footage of the feeder rallies from earlier that week. At the gala dinner, there are over 600 Riley Club members in attendance to celebrate the Riley mark. This is also the 100-year celebration of the British motor industry, which has been based in the Coventry area for much of that 100 years.
The Lord Mayor and Lady Mayoress of the City of Coventry, and Victor and Elizabeth Riley. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm only doing the Lord toast. Next door to me, Luke Ackerman's had to do the gracing in English, so he told me I had to do the Lord toast in Dutch. So here we go. Op de koningin.
Who's doing this? Councillor Stan Hodson. Thank you.
Lady Mayoress, distinguished and honoured guests, ladies and gentlemen. That was a very nice introduction, I think, from the Lady Toastmaster. Not like the one I had a few weeks ago, where the Toastmaster began by saying, "Pray for the silence of the Lord Mayor." So I'm going to enjoy what it is that I'd like to say to you. As a convention, I can assure you it gives me tremendous thrill, and a great thrill for me to be meeting Victor and Elizabeth Riley tonight, and the rest of the Riley tribe. Because in this centenary year, there are many motor manufacturers that obviously do seek to come, or rather come back, to the Mecca of the motor car, because as you all know, it all started here in Coventry, and in the centenary year, many illustrious firms are seeking to come back to the fold, but there are none more illustrious than the Riley Motors. So this is where it all began, here in Coventry, and the illustrious Riley Company have left what I think is their imperishable mark on the city, and we cherish the memory of them. And we also salute the very many owners, many of you who are here tonight, who still preserve these wonderful cars throughout the world. And we are delighted to see you. We're delighted to see you all back here in the birthplace of the motor car. And thank you for being here.
My Lord Mayor, Lady Mayoress, ladies and gentlemen, I consider it a great privilege to be invited to propose a toast at this very significant event tonight. As some of you may be aware, I'm a very new member of the Rover Group, and indeed this is actually the first time that I have represented the company in an event such as this. And I think it's true to say that anyone who is an admirer of British sports cars sees the Riley as the epitome of that style. In fact, this afternoon I said to somebody, I'm going to the centenary dinner of Riley this evening. And immediately a smile came on his face and he said, oh, my father was in the motor trade. And I remember going down to Brighton in the dicky seat of a Riley. And I had never experienced anything quite like it. And I think there is a certain emotion associated with British sports cars, but none more so than with Riley, because what other car evokes such dreams and such enthusiasms amongst so many? I think that there is a future for Riley, just as there has been a great past. It's undeniable that since Rover was acquired by the BMW Group just over 2 years ago, rumours have developed about the possible revival of the Riley name. It's very much the case that within BMW there is an enormous fund of respect and enthusiasm for the great British motoring marques. The board in Munich very much supports Rover's belief that there is a special place in the markets of the world for vehicles that are distinctly British, like the Mini, like the MG, like the Land Rover, and the Rover car. And they support our ambitions to re-establish even more powerfully the customer's recognition of the qualities that made our industry absolutely world famous. Riley is a name that just as much is part of the British product heritage as the names I've already mentioned. It epitomizes style, craftsmanship, prestige, quality, and indeed exclusivity. Like other great names such as Austin, Healey and Triumph, it therefore represents a potential opportunity for Rover to reinvigorate great traditions. I think that the re-establishment of these brands is a question of business acumen. Whether the Riley marque will return remains to be seen. It is a very precious commodity indeed. It could not and must not be used with impunity on just another new product. It would certainly be better to preserve a wonderful history, as you are doing this weekend, than to demean that history with a new product that did not match those unique values. Not for us do we imagine Riley to be a badge-engineered car. All I can ask you to do is to wait and see. Rest assured that the Riley name will continue to figure in our deliberations, and if we needed any more prompting, your enthusiasm will provide that. Thank you all very much for inviting me here tonight. I'm deeply impressed that so many people have come from so many different parts of the globe to celebrate Riley. I think that the car itself deserves that appreciation, but the fact you've made the journey says a great deal for your enthusiasm and support. I would like to ask you to raise your glasses and toast the great name of Riley, and with it, the Association of Riley Clubs.
May I present Victor Riley, Chairman of the Association of Riley Clubs. Thank you.
My Lord Mayor, Lady Mayoress, honoured guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the Lord Mayor and Mr Tom Purvis for their kind comments and good wishes. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Rover Group for the tremendous support they've given us in the last few months in mounting this rally. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Alan Teeder and all his local organisers and helpers. From my view, and just seeing part of two, they've been tremendously successful, much enjoyed, and it's been fascinating to see each evening in a pub the rally people getting closer together. It's been enormous fun. And of course every mile has had to be travelled, checked and paperwork issued. So to all the helpers as well, I thank them very much indeed.
I must have been mad. You could never imagine a car looked so bad. Its wings were all rusty and tied on with string, and half of the bonnet and doors were missing. But it's my old Riley, my pride and joy, my old Riley's for me. There's no other car like it, my dear old Riley.
Sunday morning, and the rally site is host to even more cars. Riley owners can buy spares and accessories here today and use the expertise of Riley Club spares secretaries. For example, the Riley R.M Club, catering for cars from 1945 to 1955, is here with its computer system, so every part sold is accounted for and stock updated right through the weekend. Club regalia is sold and members have access to the vehicle register of all known RM Rileys run by the register. Riley traders, repairers and auto jumblers have also taken their space at the event as well. And now, after the official judging, the much sought after prizes are awarded.
First is Pete Cattell in the 1908 V Twin. Vintage clothes. Winner F. Hodgson, 1926, 12 horsepower side valve. It gives me great pleasure to give this to Chris and Wendy Gilbert. Australia to Coventry, overland, 10,000 miles. Actual driving was from India to Great Britain. I'd like you all to join with me in showing appreciation of what they've achieved. Thank you.
As Rileys of all shapes and sizes head home after this action-packed weekend, all Riley Club members can reflect on the last 100 years of the Riley mark. From the early pioneering days, the late 20s and 30s, the heyday of Riley, the post-war successes, and sadly the final days. But over 25 years later, Rileys have been brought together over one historic weekend to celebrate magnificent motoring.